Hi, everybody. Today, Saturday, June 14th, 2025, and our friend Mark Sleboda is back with us. Welcome back, Mark.
Nima, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Dialogue Works.
Mark, let's get started with what Pete Hegseth, the head of Pentagon, said about the situation in the Middle East.
Sure, you and the audience, we're monitoring this in real time. The Defense Department has been tracking it at every level, and to include when it started and throughout. Had a meeting just this morning, and the president has been leading the way on setting the tempo of how we look at the region and ultimately recognize, a couple of days ago, Israel believed in its own self-defense. It needed to take action against nuclear capabilities and ballistic missiles, and we saw the response from Iran. We've seen that. The U.S. is postured to defend our people in the region. We've got significant assets in the region. We are robustly postured to ensure that our people, our bases, our interests are safe, and we're continuing to monitor any forces we would need to do that, capabilities we would need to do that. We will keep Americans safe. And you saw what Secretary Rubio said in his first statement opening. Ultimately, it should be clear to Iran that they should not turn their gaze to the United States. That would be.
You get the tone, the way that he's talking. Rubio said, you know that Rubio said we have nothing to do. Can you hear me, Mark?
You froze. Now I can hear you.
Yeah. What's going on with the Trump administration? They were prepared to talk with the Iranians on Sunday, and they have decided 2 days before they attacked Iran. They somehow prepared Iran for the talks. They tried to do everything to just calm down Iran, to make some sort of belief in the Iranian government that nothing gonna happen to them. Then they went on Iran. They used somehow, Mark, the same method they used drones that they used on Russian soil with the attack on Russian soil. How do you find it? How do you find the way that Donald Trump is dealing with the situation in the Middle East?
Okay, so Trump, before he became president, among other things, had a career as a reality TV star, right? The Apprentice. And it would seem that the Trump administration likes playing roles. In Ukraine, as they attempt to try to wheedle, beg, threaten, leverage Russia into accepting a ceasefire that would preserve a U.S. proxy regime in Ukraine. They're posturing as some third-party arbiter, trying to bring two warring parties together, rather than the proxy master that has engineered this entire thing over a course of a decade, essentially. Now, in Iran, with the conflict in Iran, the U.S. is once again playing a role, a public role. I see nothing, I hear nothing, I know nothing, right? This fiction doesn't fool the Iranians, and it really shouldn't fool anyone else. The Trump administration obviously greenlit and coordinated this, but far more than knowing about it, they are assisting it. They are facilitating it. Now, there's no evidence yet that actually U.S. flagged aircraft with U.S. pilots have dropped any missiles into Iran. But it's quite obvious that their satellite and reconnaissance capabilities, right, are, you heard it, real time. They're watching it real time like it's a game, right? Okay, are feeding information constantly to Israel in real time, I'm almost sure, because the U.S. has far more capabilities in that regard than Israel. The U.S. is refueling Israeli aircraft. over the skies of Syria and possibly over Iraq as well. Israel simply doesn't have enough aircraft refueling capacity to do the job alone, to maintain a pace, to sustain an intense air campaign against Israel. The distances are too great. They need to be refueled in the air. And boy, it sure seems convenient that the Syrian government was overthrown just a few months ago, because now Syrian airspace, now that the country formerly known as Syria is now Al-Qaedastan, with obviously no intentions of even casting a bad glance Israel's way, even as Israel continues to gobble up parts of what was formerly southern Syria, and to conduct air raids across the former country whenever they want to take out a piece of equipment that they don't want falling into Al-Qaeda's or anyone else's hands. So without the Syrian government there, Israel simply doesn't have to worry about Russian-provided Syrian air defense for their attack on Israel, which leads me to believe that, however scattershot the approach may seem to have been, that there is an orchestration behind all of this, leading up to this attack. Because it is possible. It is not that they're simply taking advantage of an opportunity, that they're exploiting a situation. But I don't think we should neglect the strong possibility that this is simply part of a plan. You neuter Hezbollah, you attrit the Ar-Salah's movement ability to conduct long-range strikes and assist. You get Hamas, back on its feet, still fighting for survival, and its people undergoing a starvation, genocide, blockade in Gaza. And then you go after Syrian government falls. Then you go after Iran. There's a clear logical chain that progresses up to that. So that's the role that the U.S. is playing. They're trying to pretend that they don't know anything when and of course all the munitions, right? Both the air defense munitions and the bunker busters and long range strike has been provided by the U.S. and I'm sure will be provided by the U.S. There will be a stream of armaments to keep Israel going as long as it is felt that they need to. And the Trump administration has already promised that the U.S. will assist and has already assisted in the defense of Israel. That is, if Iran dares to strike back, which they now already have, that the U.S., the UK, France, Jordan, and a handful of others will assist trying to provide air defense to Israel in the face of quite significant and withering Iranian long-range strike retaliation with missiles, ballistic, hypersonic, cruise missiles, drones, and so forth. So that's the U.S. is posturing. They're playing a game. We heard this statement immediate from Rubio: "This isn't our war." Well, then why are you helping Israel fight it? I mean, let's it's a joke. They're trying in this regard to have Israel take the brunt of any Iranian retribution. There was an incident, of course, just over a week ago where the Trump administration transferred some 20,000 small short-range air defense missiles, really anti-drone missiles. The Biden administration had ordered these anti-drone missiles created. They're kind of an ad hoc type of thing. They're taking an old dumb missile and adding a guidance kit to it to assist it in taking down drones. They made 20,000 of them. They were supposed to be delivered to the Kiev regime in Ukraine. And suddenly last week, Trump instead diverted them to U.S. forces in the Middle East. Well, now we know what for. But this pretense that the U.S. isn't evolved, that they're set on, they want to resume negotiations. Axios is telling us something quite different. Two Israeli officials claimed to Axios that Trump and his aides were only pretending to oppose an Israeli attack in public and didn't express opposition in private. We had a clear U.S. green light, one claimed. The goal, they said, was to convince Iran that no attack was imminent because the U.S. was still conducting negotiations, and make sure Iranians on Israel's target list, their decapitation list, wouldn't move to new locations. We're talking about the number of IRGC generals, high officials, civilian nuclear scientists, and the like that Israel has begun an assassination campaign on. And Netanyahu's aides even briefed Israeli reporters that Trump had tried to put the brakes on an Israeli strike in a call on Monday, when in reality, their call dealt with coordination of the attack, Israeli officials now say. And for once, I actually believe the Israeli officials. I'm quite sure that this is what happened. Meanwhile, Trump's first, the Jerusalem Post as well headlines, U.S.-Israel joint deception tricked Iran through nuclear talks, Trump comments. There appears multiple sources claiming that there was some type of joint deception to lull the Iranians into a false sense that there wasn't an imminent attack, to gain the advantage of surprise, which is all bizarre. I find the fact that Iran was so that, and it seems quite clear to me that they were caught wrong-footed, right? So many of the people on Israel's decapitation list were in vulnerable positions. It seems that the air defense was not on the highest state of alert, was not prepared for this. There are various reasons for this, but one of them seems to be that they didn't expect an imminent attack. And that is bizarre, because it was just a few months ago when Trump was elected that the Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, told us that there is absolutely no point to negotiating with the U.S. because you can't trust anything they say, right? That you shouldn't even go through the motions of a diplomatic process because it will just be used against you. That is what he said. And that was even echoed by Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, who effectively said the same thing. And this is keeping in mind that Pezeshkian is a supposed moderate who was elected on a platform, naive of improving relations with the West. And then he also came out and said it's pointless to negotiate. But here they were negotiating with the U.S. and caught, well, if not with their pants down, then at least looking the other way. I don't know any other way to read that. And what's more, the MSAD, and we must assume to a lesser extent CIA and MI6 penetration of Iran is crippling. It's at critical levels, right? The penetration of the government quite obviously, of the security services, of the intelligence, and of society in general. Mossad, we've long known that they have extensive networks, right, of sympathizers, traitors, ethnic separatists, mercenaries, terrorists, you name it, right? There's a long history of Iran with impunity assassinating scientists, generals in Iran, conducting sabotage attacks. We saw just last year, we saw the political leader of Hamas assassinated in Tehran during the inauguration of Pezeshkian. And steps should have been taken, especially after the decapitation strike against Hezbollah, the pagers, the exploding pagers, all of this. Iran should have been better prepared for this. They should have purged their own intelligence and security networks. They should have taken extra precautions. And if the leader of the IRGC, the leader of the head of the IRGC's Air Force, and the chief of the general staff of the Iranian armed forces was killed in the first hour of this assault, that's a problem. And Israel says 9 nuclear scientists they killed, civilian nuclear scientists. Iran says it was only 3. But this was significant. And what's more, as you pointed out, much like with Operation Spiderweb, right? We see these containerized drone in a box sneak attacks, where at least the Israeli press is telling us that Israel intelligence, Mossad, effectively set up drone bases inside Iran where they were flying drones out of. And we now know that several trucks carrying drones to be launched, just like what happened with Operation Spiderweb in Ukraine, were stopped, after the initial couple of waves of the attack, already several days in Iran. But that this had obviously happened during the first attacks. That is one of the reasons why it appears that Iranian air defense was so wrong-footed, because they were attacked from both without and within. I mean, it's hard for an air defense system to take down a drone when the drone appears 2 kilometers away, and that's an air defense that is really targeting aircraft and incoming missiles and the like. The different functions for different air defense systems, but that's a bad situation. So it led to, as quite my understanding, is fairly effective initial first wave attacks, not only on Iranian air defense, opening the way up for further attacks, but also on Iranian, at least a number of Iranian missile launchers, inhibiting their ability to respond quickly. And also the command and control, right? The decapitation strike against so many top officials, also inhibiting their quick decision-making process. So this was obviously worked out for some time, years, months, years. It even is likely. This was, no operation has 100% success. And we have to understand that, of course, the Israeli government is going to try to exaggerate its successes, right, as they spin their narrative. The Israeli government, and the Iranian government, of course, is going to downplay Israel's successes as the narrative war ensues after the facts on the ground. But this was fairly successful, at least initially. Now the Iranians seem to have collected themselves and launched substantial long-range retaliatory strikes with missiles and drones. And now we are in a long-range strike war of attrition. both sides exchanging volleys back and forth, hunting for each other's air defense, hunting for each other's long-range strike capability, and also essentially trying to exhaust, to overextend air defense systems, because ultimately air defense missiles are far more expensive than missiles, right? Than ballistic missiles, right? They're produced at a lower rate and they're far more expensive. That goes for both sides, because both sides are enduring long-range strikes. And the Israeli long-range strikes are more focused on aircraft firing missiles, right? They're not actually yet, that I can see, confirmed entering Iranian airspace. They're still firing out of Iraqi airspace, right? But they've got that capability. Whereas the Iranian long-range strike capability is composed almost entirely of missiles and drones. So interesting weaponry choices being played out now. But Donald Trump, the White House initially tried to pretend, oh, we're not involved with this. Don't you dare strike us. We're not involved in this. As they're obviously directly facilitating these attacks, attacks. They're obviously coordinated and facilitated. And we get these increasingly just absolutely insane, like batshit insane tweets, social media posts, and statements by Trump, right? So the U.S. doesn't have anything to do, but then Donald Trump is tweeting out, just going completely off script, making clear that this is some kind of mafia style diplomacy, right? If you don't agree with what I want, then I'll break your leg and burn down your cousin's house until you agree, right? That's what seems to be going on here. 2 months ago, I gave Iran a 60-day ultimatum to make a deal. They should have done it. Today is day 61. I told them what to do, but they just couldn't get there. Now they have perhaps a second chance. Yeah, after they've been bombed. All right, that's going to happen. Then we had Trump saying to ABC, the attack on Iran was excellent and more is to come. I think it's been excellent, Trump said. We gave them a chance and they didn't take it. They got hit hard, very hard. They got hit about as hard as you're going to get hit. And there's more to come. A lot more. When asked if the United States participated in the attacks in any war, Trump responded by saying, I don't want to comment on that. All right. That's fine. We know anyway. I mean, it's not really any surprise there. And then the piece de resistance, this absolutely chilling and insane social media post. I gave Iran a chance. I gave Iran a chance after chance to make a deal. I told them in the strongest of words to just do it. But no matter how hard they tried, no matter how close they got, they couldn't get it done. Maybe because we were changing the goalposts on nuclear enrichment the entire time. Anyway, I told them it would be much worse than anything they know, anticipated, or were told. That the United States makes the best and most lethal military equipment anywhere in the world. Yeah, that's obviously debatable now in Ukraine. Anyway, by far, and that Israel has a lot of it, with much more to come. And they know how to use it. I mean, Mafia Threats much? Certain Iranian hardliners spoke bravely, but they didn't know what was about to happen. I guess he did, though, right? They're all dead in big screaming capital letters now. And it will only get worse. There has already been great death and destruction, but there is still time to make this slaughter with the next already planned attacks even more brutal come to an end. And Iran must make a deal before there is nothing left and save what was once known as the Iranian Empire. Actually, I think it was the Persian Empire and the Achaemenid. I mean, there's lots of historical names, I don't think, but never mind. That's expecting too much of Trump. Anyway, no more death, no more destruction. Just do it before it's too late. God bless you all. I mean, this is just madness. This man is an unhinged lunatic. In many ways, Joe Biden's corpse was more reasonable. Joe Biden's corpse propped up, Weekend at Bernie's style by Sullivan and Blinken. They went out of their way to avoid any conflict with Iran during their 4 years, right? They had pantomime attacks where both sides could save face. And anytime Netanyahu tried to position the U.S. Into, being quote unquote dragged into, I hate that term, right? The U.S. has never dragged into anything, but convincing them to join an attack on Iran. The Biden, the Blinken Sullivan administration said, no, I'm sorry, we got other priorities right now. We got this Russia-Ukraine thing, and we want China, and we don't really much like Iran, but we're not. It's not good for us right now. We got other priorities. So, but Trump, I mean, he's obviously going right along with this, even as his lies aren't even convincing with social media posts like that. I mean, he's not even lying, of course. It's his administration that comes out and plays the straight man. We have nothing to do with this. It's not our war, Mark Rubio, right? Meanwhile, Trump comes out and says, I told you what was going to happen. There's going to be a lot more death. You're all dead now. It's just, the guy is, the world is in a dangerous place with a man like this in charge of the United States. I know a lot of people out there were hoping for some reason that Trump was going to be different, that he was going to change things, that he was a peacemaker, right? I don't know why they thought these things after his first administration, but now we've got a full-blown regional conflict that, it's a big regional conflict at one level. At another level, it's a geopolitical proxy war, right? It's another battlefield of the same battle that's occurring in Ukraine. Because as the U.S. is supporting Israel in this with intelligence, with refueling, with munitions, Iran doubtless is going to be supported in much the same way by Russia, which they have a strategic partnership with, a new, deepened, strengthened strategic partnership, and almost certainly also China, which they have a strategic partnership with. So this is another proxy war at one level. I mean, there are different multiple levels to this, and we can't neglect the regional issue, but this is also part of a geopolitical proxy war in a world order shaping. This is the West, right, of which Israel is undoubtedly a part of the collective West, trying to maintain and extend US-led Western global hegemony against the challengers, right? The great powers and the rising regional powers of the multipolar world, right? Of BRICS, of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right? There's multiple layers here, but Russia, China, Iran, right? I mean, that's what we see here. And Iran is considered the weakest of the three. So now they're attempting to take out Iran. And while they're making this noises about nuclear enrichment and nuclear weapons, I mean, come on. Israel has been warning since 1984 that any day now, Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon. Those were the headlines in newspapers in 1984. Netanyahu personally has been yelling about it since 1993. Saying that in just a few months, Iran. So I mean, here we are, 30 years after that, and that this is being used as justification again. That the primary goal here is regime change. That's what this is about, and the growing deterrent threat that Iran had, even without nuclear weapons, right? And we have to again point out that whatever they may say and obfuscate, both U.S. intelligence and the International Atomic Energy Agency agree that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. They have a nuclear enrichment program that could create what's called breakout capability, because they'll already have enriched uranium on hand if they decide to start a weapons program. But they're entitled to that, right, under international law and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And there was a deal to limit the amount of enrichment that, the percentage of enrichment that Iran was doing. But that was the JCPOA. And Trump ripped that up right away during his first administration, presumably just because it was Obama's signature foreign policy accomplishment. So, and it's quite obvious, Iran doesn't want a deal. They don't want, the U.S. and Iran negotiating. It's certainly not in good faith. That was just a game. That was just smoke and mirrors. They want regime change in Iran. That's their goal. And they hope that these attacks, coupled with destabilization campaign from within, will do that. I find that not impossible, but extremely questionable whether they're capable of achieving that. But I mean, we're going to find that out. The Iranian government is going to be stress tested. Israel has made clear that they, on one hand, they said they'll continue these attacks as long as are necessary. And we've heard from other officials at least a 14-day window. Other Israeli officials have come right out and said Iran was on set to have 8,000 ballistic missiles, conventional missiles, and that was too much of a threat for Israel. That's why we attacked. Right, their long-range strike capability, their ability was becoming too much of a deterrent to Iran doing exactly this. So they're essentially trying to take a window of opportunity now before Iran becomes too strong. That's what they're doing. And there's also the very high likelihood that with the new strategic partnership, that Russia was going to begin building an interconnected, integrated, multi-layer air defense and electronic warfare system for Iran, modeled after their own. And that was too much of a defensive threat. They felt the need to act against Iran, before. I mean, that's something that would take probably a couple of years at least to start building up. And quite obviously, it hasn't gotten very far yet, but that is the goal. They felt a growing Iranian threat, a window of opportunity, but ultimately what they want is regime change, and they made that perfectly clear. Netanyahu's screaming to the Iranian people, "Rebel, liberate yourselves! Come to the streets, become cannon fodder for Israel."
Mark, does it seem familiar to you?
Of course it is. I mean, this is the U.S. playbook, right? Regime change, dominion, primacy. I mean, this is
you remember February, March, April 2022. I remember clearly they were doing the same with Russia. They said this is Putin's war. This is 2020. Yeah. 2022 when they start they have decided to go to fight Russia in Ukraine.
The economic
started Antony Blinken, all the officials in Washington, they said this is Putin's war. People in Russia doesn't want this war. Putin is invading Ukraine. I remember it clearly. And they wanted to point everything at Putin. They said that, and the main goal was the regime change in Russia. And they failed to do that. They went to war. Yes. More than 3 years of the war of attrition in Ukraine. The same strategy right now.
8 years earlier, it was much more effective in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I believe that a much greater threat to Iran, a much greater existential threat to Iran, is not from Israeli or even Israeli-U.S. airstrikes. It's from Israeli and U.S. destabilization of Iran from within, right? There's Mossad, you know, say what you want, they've demonstrated again and again their capabilities. Not only in Iran, again, but Hezbollah, Hamas, and so forth. I consider Mossad a far more remarkable, you know, capable institution than I consider, you know, in its field than I do the Israeli armed forces. So, and it, you know, of course, they're focused on very particular a region and very particular things, but it has become painfully obvious the extent to which they penetrated Iran, they penetrated Hezbollah, Hamas, to in effect, maybe not quite as much, but obviously, you know, effective enough. They haven't managed to wipe out Hamas, but they have repeatedly gone after its leaders and been fairly successful with that. So the big goal for the Iranian government now is survival. And for Russia and China, their big goal is continuance of Iran, the Iranian government surviving. Beyond that, the second goal of the Iranian government after survival is the priority. The second is deterrence. They have to hit Israel and possibly Israel's allies back hard enough to stop the attacks and deter future attacks. Ultimately, it's very likely that Iran will come out of this, and if they do come out of it, they will immediately start a nuclear weapons program, because it will have finally been brought clear to them that, as North Korea has proved, the only thing that saves you from a U.S. regime change operation is getting that nuclear weapon. And Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi can tell us of the perils of those who were not successful or gave up on that goal. So deterrent is in John Mearsheimer has said that the very best stabilizing thing for the Middle East would be Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon as a strategic deterrent, and I certainly agree with that. Obviously, the U.S., the whole Middle East is extremely unbalanced in favor of the U.S. and Israel still. I mean, there is a genocide going on in Palestine, and no one is or really can do anything. Well, we could argue that the Houthis are doing something, the most moral people on the face of the earth, but they're, you know, limited capabilities for all that. So now, from a pure, cold-blooded, realpolitik look at this, I'm putting aside my sympathy for Iran, my sympathy for the Iranian people, my sympathy for the Palestinian people. If you're in the Kremlin right now, you've got a smug smile on your face. Now, there are two red lines, of course, that the Kremlin doesn't want crossed, right? They don't want this to end up with the use of nuclear weapons, right? Which is at the moment a far off, you know, never an impossibility, but off. And they want the Iranian government to survive. But other than that, they are perfectly happy with this event's transpiring, because all of the military assets, especially the US's shortaged Achilles heel air defense interceptors, that they waste more of them in the Middle East, is less they have to either give to the Kiev regime or to ever use if what happens at some point devolves into an open NATO-Russia conflict, right? They were just wasting tons of air defense missiles and long-range strike missiles playing whack-a-mole against the Houthis in Yemen, just like the Biden administration did. And what did it achieve them? That's why they just decided, oh, the math is not working out good here, right? Let's just leave, declare victory, and go away, right? I mean, that's what they did. But they wasted it a lot. and they'll be wasting more now. And that not only are they going to be wasting military assets that could have, and we've already seen one example of this with these anti-drone missiles that were transferred to U.S. troops to help protect them for this instead of being sent to Ukraine. I'm sure a lot more will come about, but also political capital, right, for conflict. There's only so much appetite for that in the United States. And now all of the political attention, all of the focus is going to be on this and not Ukraine because Israel, because IPAC, I mean, it's that clear. Another thing, because of this, because Iran is a major energy producing country, right, and the threat that Iran continually has, their nuclear option of shutting down the Persian Gulf, the price of oil has spiked, right? And that's good for Russia. That's very good for Russia, right? That provides them with extra funds for their SMO, for their economy, and so forth.
And really hurts China.
And it really it does hurt China, right? I mean, this is Iran, Russia, and China are all now interconnected to a much greater degree. They're cooperating with each other. They're sharing information. They're acting together. Kellogg, the former General Kellogg, now the Trump administration's envoy / babysitter to the Kiev regime in Ukraine for its diplomatic talks. He spoke just over a week ago to the media, to the US TV channel. And he was talking about exactly how the geopolitical situation is different now. Because whereas in the 1990s and the 2000s, the US could deal with China and Russia and Iran and North Korea separately, now they're all allied, for lack of a better word, together. They're coordinating with each other. This makes it very hard to go after any one of the three without exposing yourself in painful ways to the other two. You go after Iran and the price of oil spikes, right? Helping Russia. You threaten tariffs against China, and China responds by restricting U.S. access to rare earth metals that the Pentagon desperately needs, right? That's their primary source for high-tech components for their high-tech weapons. You back off of the trade war with China, and then you threaten bone-crushing sanctions on Russia. Turns out those bone-crushing sanctions, because you've already sanctioned everything, is actually secondary sanctions on the countries that still trade with Russia, principally China. And you're threatening, by trying to threaten Russia, you are in extent threatening 500% tariffs on China again, putting yourself back in the same situation, meaning that you can't effectively sanction Russia anymore. There's all of this. You try to move against one and you're exposing yourself to the other three. And the U.S. is having a real problem with this. That's why they're trying to edge their way out of the conflict in Ukraine on their terms, but turn it over to Europe to deal with, because they simply don't have the bandwidth anymore. They don't have the capability to deal with everything at once. Certainly not Russia, China, and Iran. And that's what we see here. Now, China, they're going to suffer from higher oil prices. But once again, all the military assets, air defense missiles, long-range strikes, if they get involved in that the U.S. wastes in the Middle East, that's assets they don't have to provoke a war with China in the near future in the Taiwanese Straits or the South China Sea. That gives China more time to build up their military to make it so that they have such a substantial gap over the United States that the U.S. won't even ever attempt it, right? That's the goal, deterrence. The same thing with the conflict in Ukraine. yes, China makes all the right words. We want peace. We want a diplomatic solution and everything. But at some level, you have to know that there are realist people within Beijing saying the longer this goes on in Ukraine, the more it drains NATO, US and NATO of their armaments, then that gives us more time. So you have this trifecta of Russia, China, and Iran now. Their coordination, their economic cooperation, their political and military cooperation has reached the level where the U.S. can't go after any one of the three without exposing themselves in uncomfortable ways to the other two.
Mark, with what's going on in the Middle East between Israel and Iran and the situation in Ukraine, there is a third player that nobody seems to talk about that much. In Iran, they're talking about them. In Russia, they're talking about them. But when it comes to overall estimation or analysis, we don't that much talking about these people. Here is what the Russian ambassador at the UN said.
The current strikes by Israel, what we noticed is the information mass media about the fact that there was likely coordination between Israel and British special services. Immediately after the Israeli strikes, they sheltered the Israeli aviation, which participated in the strikes, in their bases in Cyprus. We also noticed a statement made by Israel when they said that they warned about their attacks. They warned Germany, JCPOA participant, and Italy. It also came to the fore that our American colleagues also had information about the strikes. The Israeli strikes were also supported by the French, who clearly knew about them beforehand.
The UK did not participate in this action. And let me say clearly and unequivocally that Russia's claim that British sovereign bases on the island of Cyprus were in any way involved is nonsense. It is deeply irresponsible at moments like this for Russia to be spreading disinformation.
Yeah, they're totally involved. They're totally just look at
this satellite data, this flight path is actually kind of undeniable. I don't know what disinformation she's talking about. Denial is policy, I guess.
And I don't know if you saw the video in which just a week ago on Sky News, the conservative leader in the United Kingdom, Kemi Badenoch, said that the war in the Middle East is a proxy war on the part of the United Kingdom. Israel is fighting for us. Despite what have been said so far, how do you see the role of the British intelligence? We know that the army is not that much important, but their intelligence is so much involved in Ukraine and in the Middle East, and doesn't seem that it's appreciated by the two governments. I'm talking about Russia and Iran. Maybe China is not considering that much of the United Kingdom. What's your evaluation on their role in both conflicts?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. doesn't do anything without their sidekick. I mean, because that's the role that the U.K. has had. And occasionally, like with Trump, when you have a leader whom maybe isn't living up to the proper role of hegemonic master, then the United Kingdom occasionally plays, the tail wagging the dog of doing what they can to encourage the U.S. in the right direction, right, aggressively. And it has to be said that the UK power elite, right, in the government, in the military, in the intelligence services, they still have delusions that the British Empire never ended and that they're still a great power, right? And they're playing games that are way above their pay grade and capabilities. All you have to do is read the British press, the Telegraph, and others, and the British brag about it. That basically everything, all of the Kiev regime's operations in the Black Sea right? Whether we're talking the failed attempt at Krinky to cross the Dnieper and get killed in these swamps on the Russian side, or their games, in the Black Sea, trying to destroy the Black Sea Fleet, etc. This was all planned. This is the British baby, right? They've been in charge of this, and they're very proud of it somehow for massacres of Ukrainians and very little effectiveness, for what they've gotten. So they've been instrumental in this. They have been throughout. I mean, it was the British that sent the Challengers first, goading other countries on. Even though the Challengers didn't arrive for some time, it was this escalation. It's like I don't want to impugn hyenas, because hyenas are really fascinating animals. But you've seen a group of hyenas goading each other on in their pack to go after a lion, right? They're all moving back and forward and snapping. The UK often plays this role. So I don't want to overestimate their capabilities, but their chutzpah, their belief that they are at the center of things, and that they occasionally need to act as a goad to the US, right, to be more aggressive, is there. Kit Clarenberg did an excellent piece in the Gray Zone, talking about the role the British have had in Operation Spiderweb and other crazy plans of dirty war against Russia in Ukraine. This is what David Ignatius in the Washington Post talked about last week, that increasingly, as the Kiev regime is losing on the battlefield, they're going to turn to what they call asymmetric warfare, unconventional warfare, dirty war, assassinations, terrorist bombings, asymmetric attacks like this Operation Spiderweb. That's what they're going to do. They've actually trained for it in the US even before Russia intervened in 2022. That was openly admitted in the Western press, that, yeah, we were training them for future guerrilla warfare if the Ukrainian government falls. That was before Russia intervened in 2022. So they first of all, they knew exactly what they were doing. But I really strongly suggest that you try to get him on. I know he's busy, but try to get him on to talk about that piece, because he got some inside information. And the British had just absolutely, shall we say, fantastic plans, or absurd plans. It doesn't read so much like the plans of a young man having Ian Fleming, James Bond fantasies of operations. It's a little more Austin Powers, to be perfectly honest. One of their plans from Clint Carenberg's piece was, in their plans to destroy the Black Sea Fleet, was to establish a brothel in Crimea, a house of prostitutes with Russian-speaking Ukrainian spies who were the prostitutes. And they would manipulate drunken sailors to get inside information. This was an actual plan. As part of, I mean, it's just like crazy stuff. That was part of their plan to destroy the Black Sea Fleet, which, okay, I mean, there was a few lucky shots, but in reality, the Black Sea Fleet has, only suffered very, very minor losses over the course of this conflict, and Russia basically just took it off the board. They moved it into Novorossiysk and said, we're not using this anyway. We don't need it. This is a land conflict. Why put our naval assets at vulnerability? But the British had these grandiose ideas. They seem utterly fixated on refighting the Crimean War from the 19th century. They seem to have an odd fixation on Crimea and against Russia. But I think it's certainly unquestionable, with the Trump administration right now. I mean, yes, they don't have a coherent policy on anything. They change their minds every other day. But I think it's clear that the level of Russophobia, of Russia hatred, is much stronger in the British government and driving the British government right now than it is even the US government.
Mark, do you think that the face of the conflict today, we know that Donald Trump talked with Vladimir Putin. He said that he wants to put an end to the conflict in Ukraine as soon as possible. The same thing.
Sure.
The same thing.
He
doesn't have anything new to offer. But how is he going to influence the mindset of the leadership in Russia? Do you think that he's going to get what he wants from Russia with the case of the Middle East?
No. I mean, what are they going to threaten Russia? We'll overthrow the Iranian government unless you get a ceasefire, and Russia will say, "Go ahead and try." Waste your assets. You won't achieve it. Right now, there appears to be shall we say, a rejigging of the Kellogg plan. The U.S. is still trying to put a ceasefire. They're trying to force a ceasefire. Why? Because the Kiev regime is just getting clobbered on the battlefield. And they know where things are going in the next year. They know Russian plans for offensives, for new huge troops being put in. They know that the Kiev regime is close, if not to collapsing, then crumbling along various points of the front line. They know how bad the manpower situation is. They know what an advantage Russia has over all of NATO and the collective West in the military industrial range for this war of attrition. So they want to freeze this conflict. They want to stop it now. They want to preserve and rebuild their proxy regime in Kiev and fight this war again another day. When the Kiev regime is better prepared, when Europe is better prepared, that's their goal now. To preserve an anti-Russian UX proxy regime in Kiev. That's when he says peace. That's what he's doing. Now, I accept that Donald Trump doesn't like Zelensky, that he has nothing but contempt for him on a personal level. The same thing, Trump hates all of the European political elite for the most part, exceptions like Orban, but he sees them as liberals who sided with his domestic political opponents, were engaged, took part in the attempts to impeach him and to prevent him from regaining office. He hates them all. He doesn't much care for NATO. We know that. But he's still the U.S. president. And there are certain pressures, there are certain momentum to the hegemony that even he can't ignore. He needs to save a U.S. proxy regime. He can't be seen as weak. He can't be the president who surrendered Ukraine to the Russians, right? If he can cut a deal, and he loves spinning deals to make it look like he accomplished something, that would be one thing. But Russia's not biting, not playing along. There seems to have been a rejigging of the Kellogg plan for a ceasefire. And Kellogg has put out now that there will be a ceasefire on the current contact line with de facto people keep what they have, i.e. no more U.S. demands that they get control of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant or that the Kinburn spit gets turned back over to the Kiev regime. And they're also now hinting at a removal of all sanctions against Russia. That's the new sweetener. Now, they have no ability to actually do that, and Russia knows that. That's political. That has to go through Congress and other things. And the Europeans are certainly not on board. But it's not enough. Russia has already made clear before that they have geopolitical concerns here, that they have security concerns here, And they're not particularly, it's not high on their priority list to get rid of sanctions. In fact, there's a lot of Russians that argue that sanctions have been good for Russia. They decoupled the economy from the West. They made them independent. The Russian economy is growing. The European economy is, stagnant or entering depression, depending on, or recession, sorry, depending on which country. This is not they still aren't listening to Russia. They convince themselves what the Russian government says isn't what they really mean, right? I mean, that's the mental gymnastics that they're jumping through. So now that's their new plan to try to get a ceasefire. But of course, that's going to fail too. And the Kiev regime is already insisting that they're walking away from any further Istanbul process or something like that, which is fine for Russia, because I believe that they truly believe that no diplomatic settlement is possible that will meet their terms, and that they'll have to achieve them on the battlefield, ultimately with an unconditional surrender of Ukraine, of the Kiev regime in Ukraine. And the only question left is, at the end of the day, when there's no longer pretending that "niet" doesn't mean "yet," what does Trump do? Does he? I can't see him walking away with nothing, but does he level token sanctions? Does he attempt to level real sanctions? Does he continue arms supplies to the Kiev regime in Ukraine? These are all questions that are, of course, important to Russia. They're not going to change Russia's goals and motivations, but going one way instead of another could make Russia achieving those goals, the time frame, it could make it much quicker and much less costly. So that's why they're continuing to play this diplomatic games, this dance with Trump.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Thanks for having me, Neil.